Hi everyone, I'm Wendy, and with the holidays coming up, I thought you all might like to see how my mom and I prep for our whole food plant-based Thanksgiving. So I'm going to show you our entire food prep from start to finish. We did this prep over 2 days, one evening and one morning. But all in all, it was only about 3 hours of work to cook our entire Thanksgiving feast, including all the prep time. So you could easily do this entire prep the day before or the morning of Thanksgiving if your meal is in the evening. But if you're really short on time and you can't do it all at once, most of these recipes freeze really well. So in the weeks and days leading up to Thanksgiving, you could make one recipe at a time and freeze it. In fact, that's exactly what we're doing. Since we're making this video ahead of time, we're going to freeze all of this food so we have our Thanksgiving all ready to go. So without further ado, let me show you what we did. First up, we simply made some homemade breadcrumbs using Ezekiel bread. We toasted up several slices, and then my mom used a couple cooling racks to prop up the pieces so they could cool off and dry out a little more. If you try to turn this into breadcrumbs right after you toast it, the bread will end up steaming and it won't stay crispy. But once it's completely cooled and dry, we break it up into pieces, throw it in a food processor, and blend until it's a nice fine texture. We like to make big batches and store it in jars in the freezer, and we'll use this as a topping for several of our casserole recipes later on. Meanwhile, we cooked a bunch of sweet potatoes that we'll use to make a sweet potato casserole, as well as my vegan cheesy sauce. How long you cook these will depend on the size of your sweet potatoes. We did 24 minutes for these medium-sized potatoes. You just want to make sure you cook them really well because we're going to be mashing them. While those were cooking, we also had a pot of water coming to a boil on the stove. So now we're adding a 12-ounce package of whole grain rotini pasta. This one is made of a type of whole wheat called einkorn, but you could use whatever pasta you like. After the pasta is done cooking, we drain it and rinse it with cold water because we're making a cold pasta salad. This was an accidentally vegan recipe that we used to make all the time at holiday gatherings. My mom and I absolutely love it. So we start with the pasta going into a large storage container. This one is 14 cups. Next is about a cup of mixed chopped bell peppers, 1 can of chickpeas that we drained and rinsed, about a cup of cherry tomatoes cut in half, about a cup of chopped purple onion, and about half a cup of sliced black olives. You can leave the olives out for a low-fat and completely salt-free version, but they definitely add a nice flavor. Finally, the dressing we're using is this Italian dressing from Well Your World. We eat oil-free now, and so on our first plant-based Thanksgiving, we tried to make our own Italian dressing without oil. It didn't turn out so well and wasn't very flavorful. But then we found this oil-free one from Well Your World, and it tastes exactly like a real Italian dressing with oil. I've been using Well Your World products for years, and I absolutely love that they're all SOS free. We add the whole bottle, but you can adjust the amount of dressing to suit your tastes. And that recipe is all done, so it can go in the fridge. After that, the sweet potatoes were done cooking, but they needed to cool off a little bit before we handled them. So we decided to go ahead and make our pumpkin pie. I'm not going to show this entire recipe because it's the pumpkin pie recipe from Kathy Fisher at Straight Up Food. We've tried multiple different vegan pumpkin pie recipes over the years, but once we found this one, it was the winner. So it's the only pumpkin pie recipe we use now. The crust recipe calls for pecans, but today we swapped out walnuts instead. It's so easy to make. You simply blend the crust ingredients, press it into your pan, then blend the filling ingredients, pour it in the crust, and bake. It's really a lot easier than a traditional pumpkin pie. We also love to swap the pumpkin for other kinds of squash, like butternut, delicata, or acorn squash. But today we went with the classic pumpkin. And I will have Kathy's recipe linked in the details below. Then we started adding those cooked sweet potatoes to a mixing bowl and removing the skins. We reserved 1 cup of the mashed sweet potato to make my cheesy sauce, which I'll show you a little bit later. Then we added 6 sweet potatoes to the mixing bowl for our casserole. We simply add a little bit of cinnamon and mix this together. And that's all we use for the filling. If you wanted it a little sweeter, you could add some maple syrup or date syrup, but we just add the sweet potato and cinnamon to the bottom of our casserole dish and spread it out evenly. Then for the topping, we add a cup of rolled oats, 1/3 cup of mixed nuts, and a little bit of cinnamon to a food processor and pulse it into a rustic crumble. We add it to a bowl to mix in a little bit of date syrup, then spread it evenly over the top of the sweet potato. But that was where we stopped prepping for that evening, so we put the sweet potato in the fridge to bake the next day. The next morning, my mom started bright and early mixing up her bread dough. We have a whole video showing her bread recipe, so I'm not going to go through it all here. But we let the bread dough rise and then got our casserole dishes and ingredients all out and ready to go. Food prepping goes a lot more smoothly when you have all your ingredients ready. So we had already chopped onions, etc., and had everything else staged for each recipe. So while the bread dough was rising, we started making what I'm calling my Thanksgiving patties. I was going for traditional flavors that would go with the Thanksgiving turkey, but in a plant-based patty. We start by making a flax egg, mixing some water and ground flaxseed and setting it aside to thicken. Then to a large mixing bowl, we added 1 can of chickpeas and 1 can of Great Northern beans that we had drained and rinsed. My mom's using a potato masher here, but she switched to a fork to get every chickpea smashed. It's okay if there are some pieces of beans, but we like it to be mashed pretty well. Then we're adding rolled oats, and next is a cup of cooked whole grains. This is a mixture of rice and sorghum, which is our favorite combo to use in these plant-based patties. I have a blog post with the directions for how I make this, and I'll also link that below. Next is all of the herbs and spices. Dried onion flakes, parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme, oregano, granulated onion and garlic, a pinch of nutmeg, a pinch of black pepper, and a salt substitute. For these, we use the Salacious salt substitute from local spicery. Next up, we have some lemon juice, stone ground mustard, the flax egg we made earlier, and just a little bit of vegetable broth. If you don't add the vegetable broth, the patties may end up a little dry and crumbly. After that's thoroughly mixed, we set it aside to rest for a little bit, which will help the patties to stick together better when we form them later. And at this point, the bread dough was ready to go. My mom is forming it into little rolls, so she simply pinches off a little piece of dough, rolls it up, and places it on a parchment-lined baking sheet. She keeps a little bowl of flour to the side to dip her fingers in because the dough is sticky. After forming all the rolls, she spreads them out a little bit and will set them aside to raise a little longer. You can spread them out even more if you want perfectly round individual rolls, but these will rise enough that they end up sticking together, and then you can break them apart after they're baked. Next, we went back to those Thanksgiving patties. We like to use an ice cream scoop, which is about 3 tablespoons. My mom starts by scooping all the patties onto a silicone mat on a baking sheet. Then she has a little bowl of water to dip her fingers in, which will help keep her hands clean while forming the patties. Simply pat the scoops down into a patty shape and lay them back on the pan. These aren't cookies, so they're not going to rise, so you can fit quite a few on your tray. This recipe makes about 12 to 15 patties depending on the size of your scoop. Then the bread and the patties are going in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. We set the timer for 20 minutes, which should be just about right for the rolls and a good time to flip the patties. So while those are in the oven, we moved on to our party potatoes, also known as cheesy potatoes, Texas potatoes, or funeral potatoes, but we always called them party potatoes, and it was my absolute favorite Thanksgiving dish. My mom's original recipe had sticks of butter, yes, that's plural, plus tons of cheese. They were delicious, but knowing what we know now, we cringe thinking back to how unhealthy they were. But I love our new version just as much as the original. And what's even better is I can eat a full portion without the food hangover that I used to get when I stuffed myself with party potatoes. We start with 1.5 32-ounce bags of cubed frozen hash brown potatoes. It's best to start with thawed potatoes, otherwise it takes a really long time to bake the casserole. Then we started water sautéing an onion. We'll let those caramelize a little bit while we make 1 batch of my cheesy sauce. I've shared this recipe in other videos, so I'll just go over this pretty quickly. We're starting with a few cashews that we're going to soak in water for a few minutes, but the cashews are totally optional. Then we have a can of white beans, granulated onion and garlic, smoked paprika, turmeric, and black pepper. Next is some nutritional yeast, which gives it that cheesy flavor. But if you have a sensitivity to nooch, you can leave it out and this sauce still tastes delicious. Next, my mom drained those cashews that we had soaked and threw them in along with the sweet potato that we reserved last night, some apple cider vinegar, and some stone ground mustard. For a regular batch of cheesy sauce, I usually add about a cup of water, but for this, we're adding an additional cup. Since we're turning this into a sauce for our potatoes and then baking it, we want to make sure that there's enough liquid that it doesn't dry out. At this point, our onions were about ready. I added a splash of water to deglaze the pan, and you can see that beautiful caramelized color. No oil necessary to caramelize your onions. Then we're adding some parchment paper to our casserole dish because in the past, this one was a little tricky to clean. My mom did some fancy cuts to make it fit perfectly into this dish, which has rounded edges. I didn't think to record while she did the whole thing, but we recreated it here. So here you can see she folds it in half twice, cuts to make the corner rounded, and then adds a few cuts which will overlap in that rounded edge when she unfolds it into the dish. By this point, our rolls were done and our patties were ready to flip. They are pretty delicate at this stage, so flip them carefully. Back to our casserole, we're adding the cooked onions to the potatoes and then adding all that delicious cheesy sauce in. My mom mixes it well and then adds it to the casserole dish. We're going to set those aside while we make our final dish, green bean casserole. Over the years, we've tried 3 different plant-based green bean casserole recipes, and once again, Kathy Fisher was the winner. So this is another recipe from the Straight Up Food blog, so I won't be showing the whole thing, but I will put a link for it below. We're adding some frozen green beans to a large bowl. These actually came from our local CSA this summer, and they were so gorgeous we decided to blanch them and freeze them to save for this casserole. We're going to quickly defrost them in the microwave, and then for Kathy's recipe, we basically have some sauteed onions, garlic, and mushrooms, a very delicious creamy plant-based sauce, and we mix it all together. That goes into another casserole dish, and this one will bake uncovered. But we're going to put some foil over the party potatoes, which will help them to cook more quickly. The Thanksgiving patties are done now, so we'll set those aside and reduce the oven temperature to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Our 2 casseroles are going into the oven for about 20 minutes to start, and then we'll add a topping to the green bean casserole and check on the potatoes. Meanwhile, we're making a batch of Dr. McDougall's golden gravy. This classic recipe is so simple and absolutely delicious. We make it all the time, and it's now our go-to gravy for holiday meals. We didn't make any mashed potatoes this year for Thanksgiving, but you absolutely could make some and serve it with this gravy. But we're making the gravy to go with those Thanksgiving patties which we just finished up. We also almost forgot about the sweet potato casserole that we had already prepped the night before. It still needed to bake, so we pulled it out of the fridge to let it warm up a bit before adding to the oven. The sweet potato casserole doesn't need too long to bake, so we decided to add it in after we check on the other casseroles. So after about 20 minutes, the green bean casserole was looking good, but the party potatoes still needed at least another 40 minutes. We pulled the green bean casserole out and grabbed those breadcrumbs that I showed you at the very beginning. Kathy's recipe doesn't have breadcrumbs as a topping, but we like to use this. Of course, traditionally, green bean casserole has those crispy French's onions, but those are no longer on the menu in our oil-free diet. So instead, we simply use breadcrumbs. Then that goes back into the oven for a little bit to toast up, along with the sweet potato casserole. Once the sweet potato and green bean casseroles were done, it was time to add our topping to our party potatoes as well. Traditionally, we would use cornflakes on top of our party potatoes, but cornflakes usually have sugar added, which we try to avoid. You can find sugar-free cornflakes that are sweetened with juice, but I tend to not be able to stop eating cornflakes, so I can't have them around. So instead, we once again just go with a breadcrumb topping. So after spreading that evenly over the top, we popped it back into the oven to brown. And that's our entire Thanksgiving meal prep. Some years we add other dishes, but for the most part, these are our staples that we always have at Thanksgiving. These are the dishes my family loved most at Thanksgiving before we were plant-based. Of course, they don't taste exactly the same as the originals, but our taste buds have adjusted. So we now get just as much enjoyment from these as we did before. Plus, we physically feel so much better than we used to after a Thanksgiving meal. I'd love to hear about your Thanksgiving traditions in the comments. What are your favorite recipes? Do you try to recreate your favorites from your pre-plant-based days? Or have you created entirely new plant-based recipes to enjoy? I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.